welcome to this evening's chat. If you're in the UK and if you're in the States, welcome to this afternoon's chat. I'm very excited because I field lots of questions about product as a North American distributor of Denis Wick, and I've never actually been able to sit with like pretty much all the living designers right now in one sitting area. So I don't have to answer all the questions. They can answer all the questions, and the questions I have, our attendees did a great job sending me in some fantastic questions that'll take us through the full 90 minutes of this discussion time. So we'll get started really quick. I just wanted to give our panelists a quick moment to introduce themselves. Those links I just sent you, it's a link to our Facebook group, Team Denis Wick. And as I mentioned, if you have further questions, it's a great place to communicate with our artist group. So you can ask performance questions, product questions, and someone will reach out. And if you feel like discussing product with somebody, it'll be a good group to start doing that as well. We have more events happening through this week and into next week. So if you'd like to join one of our artist meetups, it's a great opportunity to network in one of the major cities. You can join up with one of those. And tomorrow we're doing a training session on audio and visual recording to get really professional quality with whatever you have, and also making sure you're sending those things out to your employers in the most professional way possible, which is a huge piece of information that's so important right now, where pretty much everything we're doing is recorded and virtual. So all that information is on our events page. And then also, if you haven't already, download the Denis Wick app. It's got all of our artists, all of our products, product information, video clinics, recordings of our artists. There's a Denis Wick radio station. I mean, anything you could think that you might want in the brass world is in this app. So download it, it's free. So without further ado, let's introduce ourselves quick. Stephen, let's start with you, Stephen Wick.
Okay, well, I'm Stephen. I'm a tuba player, and I'm CEO of Denis Wick Products. So I oversee the development and making of all the Denis Wick mouthpieces.
And let's continue with the Stevens. Go on to Stephen Mead.
Different spelling. Hi.
Different spelling, yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Stephen Mead, and looking at the attendee list, many of you know me pretty well, which is fantastic to see so many old friends here. So I'm a euphonium player. I teach at the Royal Northern College of Music, and I'm very honored to have been working with the Denis Wick Company directly with designs and promotions since 1995. I first met Denis Wick many years before that. But it was suggested around that time that maybe a specialist line of euphonium mouthpieces would be interesting, and Denis immediately agreed, subject to me coming up with a design that was okay. So that was the beginning of the relationship. Yeah.
And Aaron Tindall.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I think you're going to come away with a ton of information, maybe stuff you already knew and maybe some stuff that you didn't. I teach at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami, right in Florida, not in Ohio, in Florida. And I live in Sarasota, Florida, where I'm the principal tubist of the Sarasota Orchestra, 38-week orchestra here, and also the principal tuba and faculty at the Eastern Music Festival in the summertime up in Greensboro, North Carolina. And yeah, I'm a recovering euphonium player, so we can get we can get into that, but yeah.
Recovering. Okay.
And last but not least, Daniel Souza.
Hi everyone, great to see everyone. I'm a freelance horn player and teacher based in London, and I've known Stephen Wick since he used to conduct me in brass ensemble at Junior Royal Academy of Music on Saturday mornings. That was a long time ago, but now, yeah, as I said, freelance horn player and teacher, work for Paxman Musical Instruments as well. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about mouthpieces, thinking about how to talk about mouthpieces, and advising people on what might be good for them or what might not be good for them. And I've done a little bit of product testing for Denis Wick as well.
And as all of you know, if you're familiar with our products, you'll know Aaron Tindall Mouthpieces is one of our lines of tuba mouthpieces, and Paxman, what was it now, like 8 years ago, designed a mouthpiece with us, and Stephen Mead is one of the only mouthpieces or the mouthpiece that always comes up with euphonium players. You know, anytime I see a euphonium player playing, it's the Stephen Mead mouthpiece at some point. So great. Well, I thought a great a great question to start would start with you, Stephen Wick. How do you decide who you're going to work with? We had one attendee ask how the relationship between Stephen Mead and Denis Wick started, which we'll get to. But in general, when people approach you about, you know, we need this type of mouthpiece, or how can we fulfill this need in the market? I mean, I'm sure you get a lot of them. I get a lot of those, and I end up sending them over to you. How do you decide what direction to go as a manufacturer?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to answer. One thing I would say is, when you're working developing mouthpieces, you would need to work with the very best players, because unless you have very fine control and really good ears, you're not going to be spotting all the very, very subtle differences. You've got to be incredibly consistent. You know, if you're going to be testing mouthpieces and, you know, hearing the different sounds, you and yourself have got to be a very consistent player. So when we work with people, really do like to work with the best. So that's why it's been such a pleasure to work with Stephen and Aaron here. It's really crucial. One of our trumpet lines was with very great British trumpet player, Maurice Murphy. And again, Maurice was such a strong, consistent player. He knew exactly what he wanted, and we were able to deliver that. Yeah, so that's really how that kind of development comes about.
Stephen, how did you specifically end up starting to work with Denis? I think you said, did Denis reach out to you, or did you reach out to Denis?
Well, it's a very interesting question. So I've always had a very close contact with Boozy and Hawkes Musical Instruments, Besson, and for many years they were always together under the same umbrella. And I remember it was early 1995. My good friend Roger Webster. It's funny, everything's come together tonight. I've just finished a Besson Fridays recording with Roger Webster, where the featured guest in memoriam was Maurice Murphy, and we were discussing his mouthpiece, and Thomas Ganch from Nozzle Brass held up the mouthpiece that Maurice gave him, which was a Denis Wick Maurice Murphy mouthpiece, the same one he used on 2 of the Star Wars movies. So it's amazing how everything's come together today. But anyway, back in 1995, Roger Webster said to me, Steve, I've had a request from JK Mouthpiece to maybe do a line of cornet mouthpieces. I said, oh, very interesting. I know a bit about them. And they would like to know whether you'd like to do a euphonium series. And I said, Roger, the first thing we need to do is talk to Boozy and Hawkes Musical Instruments, you know, because we're going outside the family. So David Humphreys, the very charismatic then MD, leaned back on his chair and he said, why don't you talk to Denis? And I said, well, Denis has never had another name connected with his mouthpieces. This is fantastic range. So he said, I'll give him a call. And 10 minutes later, Denis says he's very happy about this. So I was completely gobsmacked and happy that the great Denis Wick would be interested in a line of specific euphonium mouthpieces. Because until that point, even, you know, and still the 4AL is an extremely popular euphonium mouthpiece, but we didn't have anything that was just for euphonium. It was a trombone mouthpiece that worked very well on euphonium. So I met with Denis and he said, you know, send me a drawing. And at that moment you think, oh my goodness, what's the first mouthpiece going to look like? You know, because I had no experience. I've done a little bit of design work with instruments for Besson, you know, this affects this, and maybe if we change this and let's test it. But with mouthpieces, I played on a 3AL mouthpiece for 25 years of my career. I swore it was the only mouthpiece I'd ever play. And so then kind of out the blue, you get the chance to make a new mouthpiece. So I just sat down and thought, what would a euphonium mouthpiece look like? And the first drawing I came up with was, well, maybe like a big French horn mouthpiece. You know, we have this unique voice. It's different to the trombone. Exhibit A was the the first SM mouthpiece back in 1995. And I've got some beautiful photographs. So 4 months later, after some drawings and what about the rim and what about the depth, I met up with Denis at the Edgware factory, the old Boozy and Hawkes Musical Instruments factory. and we took some pictures together, and that was the beginning of our collaboration. I felt sure that a euphonium mouthpiece didn't have to be the same as a trombone mouthpiece. The very conical nature of the euphonium and the cylindrical design of the trombone meant that there were going to be differences, and we should try to discover what they were. And so since then, you know, we've gone through a couple of different models and evolutions. And yeah, I'm really thrilled about that connection was possible. And it came about, as I say, as a casual conversation. How about we make a mouthpiece somewhere? And it was just logical and wonderful that Denis at the time accepted the idea. Yeah.
And actually, Stephen, another one of those conversations was when you and I were talking, and you mentioned that you knew this very good American tuba player called Aaron Tindall, who had some very interesting ideas, and that's how that came about.
Yeah. Aaron plays down his euphonium teaching. He was a fantastic euphonium player, but even while we were together at the RNCM, he kept saying, "I'm going off to a brass quintet rehearsal now on tuba," and it was like, "You're doing what? Think about your embouchure, boy," you know. And he and of course, you know, I'm so full of admiration that Aaron's done with his career. It's really extraordinary. And the fact that he could come up with this brilliant line of tuba mouthpieces, and we pool our resources. That's what musicians do. None of us are islands. We only thrive because of our colleagues, you know.
And I think with horn mouthpieces, I mean, the Paxman range really came about through Denis knowing Tim Jones and the LSO. I think that's how it all happened, doesn't it, Dan?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's. I think it was definitely one of Tim's projects for sure. Bringing, I suppose, it was a marriage between the Paxman, our own brand mouthpieces, and bringing it into line with some of the rest of the Denis Wick range to create that middle ground, and they're still very popular.
Oh, no, it's good to hear. Yeah.
Stephen, I was going to, while you were talking about why you were being asked or wanting to create a specific euphonium mouthpiece, if you can talk a little bit between the difference between trombone mouthpieces and euphonium mouthpieces, and why you make a specific one. This is a question from one of our attendees.
It's a very good question. I have to say, I've also had a lot of contact from trombone players who say that they love playing on the ultra mouthpiece for euphonium, but traditionally euphonium players play on at least a size bigger than trombone mouthpieces. So you're not going to give an ultra 4U to a trombone player because it's got too much space, but exactly what we need for euphonium. But you know, if you look at the design of the SM mouthpiece, which was our 1995 onwards model, which still sells incredibly well, I have to say. I mean, you know, 25 years later, we wanted something that captured the resonance of the instrument, that had sweetness, that had beauty, that was still positive, but would enable the instrument to really sing. You know, so many of the euphonium players around the world play in brass bands, a lot play in wind orchestras, you know, and sometimes I find a wind ensemble player who wants a bit more metal than the original series because it makes it more stable, if you like, slightly less easy to sing, and more straight, which has that more kind of conical nature. So a lot of wind ensemble players prefer that slightly straighter sound, but in a brass band, then that singability is so important. But neither did you want a mouthpiece that's very airy or not focused, because I think tastes have changed over the last 20 years, 25 years. And brass band players now need a variety of sounds and colors. And similarly, wind band players who used to just enjoy playing straight tones with the trombones and saxophones and an octave above the tuba, now find that they have enjoyed finding the real sonority. I don't want to say they didn't have it before, but these extended sonorities of the euphonium, all, you know, in America, across Asia, and in many Asian countries, the euphonium market has exploded in the last 20 years. And they're trying to decide what sound is best for them. So again, that essential difference between euphonium and trombone. I think the euphonium has to have a richness of tone. And I think, I'm generalizing, of course, but the trombone needs more projecting power and air that goes through the instrument, and the euphonium sound is more within the instrument. And of course, there's no blueprint. You can't just look up, page 26 of the Mouthpiece manual. The euphonium mouthpiece will look like this, because we still test it, And what I've always done is to find a mouthpiece that makes me even play 1% better than the old one. And I know that I'm winning, and that's exciting. And it's a never-ending challenge. Steve will know that I'm always coming up with designs. How about this? And it's like, hang on a minute. But that's just the nature of me as a designer performer. If I was just a performer, I just wait until somebody says, try this, I think it's better. But when you get that unique privilege to be able to change things by 0.5 millimeter and change the curvature of the internal cup, and be able to work with machinists and designers that can say, yeah, when do you want it? Day after tomorrow? I mean, that is just an unbelievable privilege. And I think that's why I've been so motivated, not to design new models for the sake of designing new models, but as we do when we sit down and practice, we want to play to get better. We want to design to make it better for ourselves. And of course, for our students and friends, and for the worldwide fraternity of players. And I think that's what motivates us. It's not, science for science's sake, or it's just the fact that, as we strive to get better as musicians, if we have equipment that helps us even a tiny percent, then I'm thrilled to do that. And Stephen and Denis and all the people in the factory in Poole have always been so supportive. Sometimes they've had to rein in my enthusiasm a little bit, but that's good. We all need that. We all need boundaries.
One thing which I found interesting is your very profound connection with the instrument. And of course, we had a situation a few years ago where your brand of euphonium, which used to be manufactured in Edgware, they moved the manufacturer to Germany. And I remember you calling us and saying, something's not right here because the instrument's changed, and we've got to change the mouthpiece. So
yeah,
and
I do remember
that's
that.
when we started on the Ultra series.
Yes, it was. Yeah, so we moved the Besson production moved to Germany 2006, and of course the SM series had been out 11 years, was established in the market, and you just get a feeling sometimes that it's time to work towards a next step. And there was no doubt that the German-made euphonium is wonderful. I love it, but it wasn't the same. The metal was different. The thickness of the valve block was just slightly different. Old imperial measurements were replaced by metric, and there were some small changes. And you also, I also tried to look around to see what other people are playing. So if somebody's playing another mouthpiece from a different brand, I'm not disappointed. I treat this as a learning exercise. Like, what is it about that mouthpiece they like the best? And if you see a trend, and if you see that people want something, so for example, with the Ultra, we needed just a little bit more weight here, as opposed to the original design. And of course, you could say, well, that looks just like a Vincent Bach mouthpiece. It looks like, like all sorts of trombone mouthpieces. But the version of the Ultra that we ended up going into production with in 2008 was version 10. So my prototype says Ultra 10 models that went backwards and forwards. We changed the weight here. We did a cutaway here. We made this longer. And every time it was, and I used to use my kids, my two children who had great musical ears. They were my sounding board. Of course, I kind of knew, but I needed reinforcement. So when my kids were like 8 and 10, and I said, James, Alicia, we've got a new mouthpiece. They knew the routine. They went in the kitchen. They sat on the chairs. They turned the wrong way. Mouthpiece 1, mouthpiece 2. We went through this, and they said, Dad, number 2 is better. Yeah, that's my old one. Okay, thanks. And really that validated. It's fantastic. You use children for testing, Anyway, this is all very healthy stuff.
And there was me thinking it was your wonderful ears, Stephen.
Well, sometimes you like what you want to like. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, yeah, I really like this shirt, and people are going, really? So, and finally, after it was nearly a year. My kids were sat there, and I said, number 1 or number 2? And they said, number 1. I said, come on. And they said, well, we think that your old mouthpiece is number 2, but we think number 1. And it was like, yes. And I absolutely, and that was the beginning of the Ultra. And so,
Mm.
by 4 years later, we realized that the Ultra mouthpiece was actually a very deep cut mouthpiece. It made a wonderful sound. And then some players are saying, you know what, I struggle a little bit with stamina. And I'm kind of going, yeah, I know, I've seen the trend. So we went to the Ultra X. And then some people will say, I really like the rim of this. And then we had the XR. So, it's listening to what we want, listening to what other players sound like, what they sound good at, and I've definitely learned from a few innovations from other mouthpieces, but I'll never ever admit what they were. But we have a great series of ranges within the Denis Wick company. Stephen is very clear that we need to present ranges and sizes within ranges, so customers have a nice choice of sounds and responses that they want, and for me, it's wonderful that the SM series from 1995, the SM4, is still one of the biggest selling mouthpieces, so we weren't far wrong, because players won't stay on a mouthpiece if there's a better one around. So I'm really happy that the process of evaluation and leaving no stone unturned to get it right before we release it. I'm really happy with what we've done. Yeah. Am I talking too much? I'm sorry.
No. But you did mention something interesting. So the introduction of the Ultra was because your instrument changed. And this is another attendee question. And this is open to all of you. What's been the impetus to change a mouthpiece, or for you, Aaron, to create your own mouthpiece? Was it instrument change? Was it tone change? Was it music that you found yourself having to play a lot? What's the impetus for you to change a mouthpiece?
Yeah, I mean, I'll get to that in a second. Just to pick off of where Stephen Mead just left off, I was actually there in 2006 and 7, studying with Steve, doing my master's, graduated with distinction, and had a great time with him and Dave Thornton there. And I remember Stephen coming in with bags of mouthpieces and, okay, this feels a little too small for you, try this, try this, try this. And I mean, I think I kind of helped you settle in the SM2, in your range. I mean, we went, because I'm a big mouthpiece, I always preferred a deeper cup, and so I mean, that's kind of where my interest sparked. And then I shifted over to playing the tuba really seriously after there. And I worked with Mel Culbertson, and of course everybody knows who Dan Parentoni is, Mr. P. He has his own line of mouthpieces, with Parentucci, and I won't get into how I ended up working in depth with Warren Deck of the New York Philharmonic, worked with him, and I've worked with Joe Alessi. So if you know those names, these people all have their hands into equipment. And it was just always amazing to me, these little things that I would learn from my mentors and how they affected my playing, and having something that matched me or matched different equipment. And being a tuba player, I've got like 7 or 8 of these now. So, and they're all very different. Stephen Wick there, I see 3 tubas in your room. If I pan around my room here, you're going to see tons of stuff. And here's the thing, there's so much equipment that's out there, and there are so many different types of players, aren't there? There are people with flat faces, people with fleshier lips, thinner lips, bigger oral cavities, long teeth, short teeth. I mean, we're all made differently, thank God,
And huge difference in lung capacities too.
Yeah, absolutely,
By the way, Aaron, David Thornton is with us online. So
that's me. Hey, Dave. I won't say anything bad.
And several RNC students. So.
All right, RNCM Unite. But so it really tripped it off for me when I was working with Warren Deck. I've got a mouthpiece here that he made for me in his garage, just out of a Bach 24AW blank, and then deciding where that shank went into the mouthpiece and where it lined up with the gap, and measuring things and getting down to precise measurements, and then playing around with weights, and you can see how big that one is, and the way that the throat, needs to come into conjunction with the cup and stuff. So that really just piqued my interest. And I was an artist with Mina Weston, and designed, a tuba with them. And, I just had a lot of different ideas, and happened to be, you know, in the right place at the right time and lined up with Stephen Wick. And I always loved the consistency of this company, whether it was mutes or, you know, mouthpieces, or if I was trying, you know, this model of a heritage or a classic or, you know, a Stephen Mead series or an ultra series, the consistency that I saw out of this company was just unreal compared to, I won't go through a whole list of other companies where they have massive issues with consistency. And if you're going to put your name on something, it needs to be the same every time that it comes out of a box. And I have, without a doubt, if I hand all my students here, try this AT3 on your C tuba mouthpiece, that they can try 5 of them and they're all the same. And they all play virtually the same. And the finish is unreal as well, you know. So I had always had all of these ideas, you know, okay, for, you know, 6/4 C tubas for me personally, and, you know, my conglomeration of friends, you know, I would send mouthpieces to friends when we started, you know, here, try this out. I think this does for me. How does that work for you? And get their feedback, just as I saw my former teachers do with students and other professionals alike, you know. So I've got 8 models, and we have a 9th, I've got the 9th one here, the 0. Which is absolutely spectacular, and it's just been a slam dunk success. And you know, I would say a virtue of my mouthpieces is the stableness and the rich overtone series, clarity of articulation, balance of sound. And if you like a mouthpiece that takes you to what I call the slot of the note, where there's tons of security in the pitch and tone, and almost like guiding and directing your buzz to the right place, you know, because as you play tuba, the slots are really wide between instruments. And I'm a huge believer that just getting the right mouthpiece plugged in for your equipment and for you can make all the difference, you know. And sometimes people get into these audition situations or recording situations, and it's that you know, it's that little 1 to 2% that can really separate people. And if your equipment is lined up for you precisely, it can do just that.
Yeah. Aaron, I mean, you talk, you know, about, you know, this rim and this throat and this length of shank and this width and so on, which is all absolutely crucial. But I think more important, and one of the reasons, you know, I love the work we did on those mouthpieces, is that you had a very strong concept of the sound you wanted. And I think that underlies everything. You knew exactly, you wanted a sound which was big and warm, but had real focus. And, you know, the mouthpieces really follow that concept, you know, from the number 8 right down to the number 0. And I think that's so important. And also, of course, it's why the company exists, because Denis, when he was in the London Symphony Orchestra, he was searching for a particular sound. They played in the Royal Festival Hall, which I'm sure all of you know that, and it's a very big, very dry hall. They were playing the newly imported American large bore trombones, and they came with a mouthpiece which didn't create the sound he wanted, and he searched and searched, and he had this, I'll call it a vision, but that's the wrong word. He had this concept of sound that he wanted to produce, and there wasn't a single mouthpiece in the market which achieved that. So he experimented and eventually, you know, produced this prototype mouthpiece. And you know, that's how the company started. He had to take it to a mouthpiece maker. And the mouthpiece maker said he couldn't make just, you know, 1 or 2. He had to make however many it was. I think it was 80 or something like that. And yeah, that's how the whole thing got going. But it comes from that wanting to achieve a sound concept.
Absolutely. I mean, I play in so many different halls, you know. For instance, I subbed and went up and played Bruckner 7 with the National Symphony in Kennedy Center. And my mouthpiece of choice, I think I was like playing my 1 or 2 at that time, you know, on my Yama York behind me. And I think I ended up paring it down to a 3 because it was just too wide of a sound for that space, you know. And it wasn't until I went out and put my my phone, microphone out in the hall halfway out there and really hear what it is that the audience hears, I just easily switched over equipment. The glorious thing about the Denis Wick company, all of my mouthpieces have the exact same rim. So it didn't change up that much. We're so trained into muscle memory, aren't we? The way you do anything is the way you do everything. So I'm a huge believer in keeping that rim quality the same. And like you just said, with your father, it changes, what halls you're on. We like to wear different shirts every day. We like to eat different food. We like to, change our shoes. I'm kind of a big believer. Some days I want to play in the bigger mouthpiece, and have the stamina and power to do it. Other days I want, a little more ease into what I'm doing, or maybe a little different timbre of sound. It's so much easier to do that than to switch up, and get a different euphonium or get a different trombone or horn or tuba, isn't it? So yeah, that's the mouthpiece junkie in me speaking.
Yeah.
Well, we had a lot of specific mouthpiece questions, so I thought to organize them a little bit, we'd start from working from the outside of the mouthpiece in. So there was a couple questions about mass in the mouthpiece, which has come up a couple times now, but people, I think a lot of musicians look at mouthpieces that, if there's more mass, it's going to give me this, and if there's less mass, it's going to give me this. But I think what's something unique to the Denis Wick mouthpieces is where you place that mass.
Yep.
So and how you adjust the rest of the mouthpiece. And the Heritage series or Paxman is a classic example of that. So if one of you feels passionate about that subject, does anybody want to elaborate on that a bit?
Perhaps I could begin by answering and perhaps hand over to Dan. But
Yeah.
when we were developing the DW Paxman range, we actually made, with the same internals, we made 7 different mouthpieces with different amounts of weight. So from really ultra lightweight to some ultra heavyweight. And I suppose it's unsurprising in a way, but the very light one sounded very light. It was highly responsive. It was very easy to play, but the sound, it sounded flimsy and it wouldn't have projected in a big hall. At the other end of the spectrum, the heavy one had incredibly powerful projection, but it was very unresponsive. You really had to work hard to get that sound out. And after testing it with various horn players, the one everybody liked was the one bang in the middle. So that is the shape that we use for the Paxman series. And to my ear, it combines this lovely bloom and responsiveness with, really good projection as well. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, Dan? Of course. Yeah, so for those of you maybe don't play the horn or haven't ever spent that much time looking at a horn mouthpiece, they tend to be a lot lighter in general than most other instrument mouthpieces. So a piccolo trumpet mouthpiece is going to be heavier than a horn mouthpiece, and that's really a hangover from the way they were made, because horn mouthpieces are often a funnel. In the 18th and 19th century, they were made from sheet brass, so they were folded round, so they were very, very lightweight and very responsive. But as horns got heavier and things, mouthpieces and technology evolved, we get turned mouthpieces and, the standard sort of shape that we used to. So that's one of the Denis Wick Paxman ones on the screen there, which is the same shape as I think the Heritage range for the rest of the instruments. Is that right, Steve? Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
And for instance, this is a 19th century sheet metal mouthpiece. It's about 150 years old, I suppose. I would never play that on a modern horn because it's far too light. It feels so strange if I play this on my modern Paxman horn. It's too lightweight. It doesn't project. The sound goes all thin and brittle. On the natural horn, though, which is a much lighter instrument itself, thin material, really responsive because we use our hands to change the notes. It's brilliant. But a valve horn, you definitely want that mass. I think those the Wick Paxmans are right in the middle of where you want it. As Steve said, the middle weight was the one we wanted. Horn, because we hold it up and it's quite an angle that we approach the embouchure with the mouthpiece. It's too heavy. You really can feel a heavy drag on the embouchure. So you want something right in the middle, and I think those Denis Wick packs from Mouthpieces really are just the weight you want. There's enough mass to give protection, but they're not so heavy they start affecting everything else as well. And really, I mean, most horn mouthpieces from a variety of well-respected manufacturers, they're all really in this big middle vein, but there are so many ways to shape that same mass of metal. It really does matter where you put it. So I think if you've got a mouthpiece which is very well balanced, that can make a huge difference to sound, rather than just the weight you put it on a scale. It's about where that weight is and how that affects the way we play.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Yeah, that's great. I mean, Mary, we've been working with our US artists on the heritage shape for the trumpet mouthpiece, and I've got one of them right here, all ready to go. And I mean, you worked very closely with a lot of trumpet players on that, didn't you?
There you go. I was just going to pull up a picture of the mouthpieces while I talk here, but yes, the Heritage series for a long time it's been so popular with the cornet artists. I play on it. I had a very hard time, truth be told, on the classic series because I have a very dark sound to begin with. So the classic series, I had a really hard time getting out of that dark sound area. So when the Heritage came out, it was just my saving grace. And right around the same time, I switched from playing in the first row to playing soloist. So it was a game changer for me. And sitting at ITG every year, all these cornet players were coming up to me asking about when we can bring the Heritage mouthpiece to the trumpet line. And so now, quite a few years later, we've had quite a few artists from the commercial scene in LA and New York switching over to Denis Wick Mouthpieces and loving the mouthpieces, but on certain recording sessions where they need a specific timbre and a very high range over and over and over again, sometimes the weight of our mouthpieces was getting in the way of that. So I came back to Stephen and Dennis about that, and Brian, and said, is there any way we could try working on this line again? So long story short, one of the reasons that it works so well for cornet players, and I think this was just the idea of the Heritage, is that as both Daniel and Stephen were mentioning, there's that middle weight, and the weight of the mouthpiece is kind of in the base here, but to give you that extra ring, they've thinned out the upper walls and the rim, which for trumpet players we've been finding has just been amazing. Everybody we had try them at NAMM last year was trying to beg us and offer us money to take them home with them. So it's been a long time in coming, but they're finally going into production, and it was a very exciting process because it was one of the few moments for me. Mouthpiece, I stay away from trying to find a new mouthpiece as much as possible, and I think there's a lot of that sentiment among brass players. We want to sound better, but it can be very scary to change up equipment. But it was very exciting to take something and give it to somebody and have them feel like they immediately played easier, immediately played higher, just, immediately things spoke better. And I think it's that, extra weight giving you focus and lighter walls and rim, that combination of response is just exactly what that area of players needed. And, we were talking about weight and the horn, like in what horn you play and the weight of the mouthpiece. I think that speaks very similarly to piccolo trumpet players. A lot of piccolo trumpet players use a trumpet mouthpiece, and when I think about it, trumpet mouthpieces are pretty heavy, just the standard ones. But piccolo is a pretty light instrument, so I have a feeling these will work really well. Actually, I know these are going to work very well on piccolo. So we have a few artists who have been sending me recordings of their piccolo playing. But interestingly, though, one of our Denis Wick artists here in the States on the Paxman side, she loves the Paxman side, but she was mentioning to me, and actually she sent me the exact issue because I was going to be talking with. She's here today. But she was mentioning that because of that thinner rim, her lower lip kind of slips out from under the rim when she shifts into the from lower embouchure setting to higher one. And Dan, I was thinking maybe if you could speak to that. Have you had any experience with that, or have you had any other horn players talk to that, and if you have any suggestions?
Can't think of any specific feedback from selling them and showing them to people about that. I mean, I think it's the edge of the rim here is quite different to the majority of some of before. You know, so you've got a sort of curved backside to it. I think because the heritage shape and then Paxman ones is quite sharp. It can feel a bit different on the lip, I think. So I don't think it's been an issue for that many people, but I can see how it could be if, you know, if you did move quite a lot for different registers, you know, if you're not used to that thinness there, that could, you know, I can see how that would be a problem. But I think, you know, if there are, it would be easy to find another mouthpiece probably in the Wick range that would work in the same areas for you, but with from the classic range with that different shape on the backside of the rim that might make it easier.
Yeah, I was curious because on the trumpet side, I run into the same issue, not necessarily from low to high range, but I think it depends on the teeth shape, whether you have the overbite or an underbite or, you know, straight on. I feel like that's affected how trumpet players or cornet players react to the heritage line. And I mean, do not quote me on this. This is just my, you know, the few number of people that I've ran into, but I feel like people who have that straight on bite with no overbite, I feel like the heritage slips a little bit for them, whereas people with a slight overbite have a great time playing it. And that's the only thing I can narrow it down to. But I was just curious if you'd seen anything similar in the horn area as well. I'm sorry, Stephen, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to sort of say with horn mouthpieces, I mean, we do make this wide rim horn mouthpiece in the classic series. And it's actually an extremely popular mouthpiece. And Dan and I were sort of joshing the other day that, I mean, horn mouthpieces are very unusual because they have a much bigger variety of style than any other instrument, I think, because they go from the narrowest of narrow rims to incredibly wide rims, to extremely large cup diameters, to very small cup diameters. And Dan, why is there such a huge variety in horn mouthpiece designs? Is there a reason for it?
I don't think there's one answer. We'd be here all night, Steve. It's a different seminar. I think it just I think the horn, there are lots of very distinct sort of national styles and always have been. You know, really up until the 60s and 70s, I think in the UK, everyone played on very small mouthpieces, you know, sort of 15 to 16 millimeter inner diameter, but with very, very steep side, long throats. And then in America, they're similar, but then some of them or there was also a trend where they're very, very big. And then I think in the 70s, I'd say in London, that sort of people started getting slightly bigger, towards 18 mil. But then, of course, people started copying trumpet mouthpieces and having more of a bowl-shaped cup. So you've got lots of different options there. And then I suppose compared to other instruments, maybe because removable rims are quite common in the horn world, then that's another thing to experiment with. People experiment continually, and I think that's kind of why that range of sizes has been the same. I think it's great that you can accommodate all that. You know, if you look at your classic range, it's quite broad. You know, you have got a smaller mouthpiece going up to the bigger four, and then in the Paxman ones, I mean, you've chosen a really sort of median rim size, but then the cups move around that, which is great that, you know, you've got a fixed rim range of mouthpieces, but they have the same rim. Whereas there are some other manufacturers who make fixed rim mouthpieces, but none of you can't move up or down a size without changing the rim, and they all have completely different rims as well, which is very, very problematic. If I'm advising someone and they've got this mouthpiece, but they want this, but slightly different, I sometimes have to spend a lot of time on spreadsheets working out what size in someone else's range to send them to. It's very difficult sometimes to move people sideways in a range. And that's why, you know, the Denis Wick Paxman mouthpieces and actually the Paxman mouthpieces are the same. The rims stay the same. You choose your rim size and then you can move up and down within that. And that's far more useful, I think, than than having every single mouthpiece being different. So I think it's kind of what Aaron was saying about your range. You kept the rim size the same. Is that what you're saying? I think, which means you always feel comfortable, but then you can move the cup underneath.
Mm. And Stephen, even with your mouthpieces, I mean, we have different cup diameters, but the rim shape is basically the same in all.
The rim shape, yes. I remember way back
apart from the latest R ones, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So until 2 or 3 years ago, we had the same rim contour, you know. And I remember the conversation I had with Denis, and he said, "Well, look, in the orchestra, you know, sometimes they'd be sitting there for 5 minutes resting, and then have to pick up the instrument and immediately feel it on the face. Whereas euphonium players, even in wind orchestra, are playing a lot more of the time, and in brass band, we're playing all the time. You know, if you get 8 bars, if you get 8 bars rest in a brass band, you can have a, you know, happy days. So we needed something that was comfortable, but you also needed to feel the rim. You know, you need to feel it there on the face so you can play flexibly. So I remember the first drawing I did, you know, so I'm simplifying, but the 4AL rim went, and we gently fell off the edge of the cliff. And as soon as euphonium players put it on their face, they said, "Oh, that's great." But then as time goes on, people try another mouthpiece and there's more comfort, maybe not the same response, but, "Oh, I really like the way this feels." And so a couple of years ago, based on some other instruments, other mouthpieces I'd seen, I said, "Look, maybe we can make this even rounder." And so with the 4XR, which is the mouthpiece that I currently play, you probably can't see it here, but I hate doing this in front of a camera. It's much more rounded than we ever had. And honestly, you know, in the old days, if I did a 4-hour session, I'd know about it the next day. And now I really don't. There's incredible comfort. Of course, the more rounded you make the edges of a mouthpiece rim, the less center you feel. So there is a little bit of adapting to that. So, but, you know, tastes have definitely changed. And it's really interesting talking about this top part, you know, critical for the heritage. When we, in all the mouthpieces, except the original SM, we've tried different thicknesses here to go very thin. And immediately you notice a mouthpiece is incredibly responsive. It's like driving a car and then getting in a sports car. You suddenly think, "Oh God, this is fun," you know. But on a euphonium, that's not enough because it can feel really sensitive. But then if you're working on tonal stability and flexibility right across the range, there comes a point where you say, "You know what, I think this needs to go bigger." And then you make it too big, and you'll know from some experiments we've recently done, 0.5 millimeter on there can make a difference. And then it's about striking that balance. And then because of the way we make mouthpieces, you know, we make thousands rather than tens. We've got to make a mouthpiece that the whole world is going to love. So yes, you can offer a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the euphonium size. But you can't offer, you know, 5 or 6 different rims as well. Otherwise, every dealer would have to stock, you know, 24 versions of the same mouthpiece. So you come up with something that you genuinely believe is the best you can for that size, that is comfortable, that creates a balance between this super response and feeling to stability, to flexibility, to sound quality, which of course is the number one. You can live with some things, I suppose, if the sound quality is to die for. But then you have to have something that means you can still play it after 2 hours and not, you know, be absolutely pressing your lip and, you know, gently crying to yourself in the last half an hour of a band rehearsal when you can't play above top A. So all of those balancing things go into a mouthpiece, and very often it's the medium size. But as I say, I played a 3AL mouthpiece, which is a great big bucket of a mouthpiece now, all the way through my Desford years, through all that and out the other end. And it wasn't until, you know, 6 years after I left Desford Band that I think about even changing the mouthpiece. And then it was the 3 Ultra. And it wasn't until, this is a terrible confession, but about 2013, I got a sore on my lip just before a big concert where I was playing the Spark Diamond Concerto. And the 3 mouthpiece absolutely hurt like hell because it was right on this little spot. So I flipped over to the 4, did the concert, got away with it. 4 weeks later, the spot had gone. And I thought, well, you know what? I really like this. So we also change as we get older. It doesn't mean that small mouthpieces are for old people, but they're you know, that would be a terrible generalization. But we evolve as players. We evolve in terms of our sound. You know, if I listen to the first recording I made in 1990 with the one I made last year, I mean, it's the same player, but only just. So sound concepts change. We change. What we want change. The control of our muscles change. So as mouthpiece designers, we're not just designing mouthpieces for players in their mid-20s at the peak of fitness. We're designing mouthpieces for kids who are 12 years old and who are 80 years old and still enjoying playing their instrument, you know.
Yeah.
So, and that's, you know, that comes with experience to design a mouthpiece that's going to get thumbs up. And if you look at the recent poll they did on the Euphonium Facebook page, I think out of the 10 most popular mouthpieces, I think 7 of them are Denis Wick mouthpieces. So that's a really great feeling.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
well,
I know.
Congratulations, Steve. Fantastic.
I'll send you that. But the 4AL is still top.
Is it?
The 4AL is still top of that because it's been around since when did Denis start? 1968.
Yeah,
and that was the first mouthpiece. It's traveled well. It sounds great. People still love it. And some of the top players, you know, people like Bastien Baume are still absolute devotees. And it's no coincidence that most of his students also play the 4AL. But that's great. The fact that we offer this range between the AL, the classic series, the SM range, the Ultra, the X and the XR means we've kind of got it covered. But you know, Stephen, a lot of people don't. We're still working to the future.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've got some interesting plans.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But outer shape is definitely a big factor. It didn't used to be. There were many manufacturers years ago who said the outer shape made no difference at all. And
do you know, I think Reynolds Schilke actually said that to my dad.
He did say that. Yeah. You know your history.
One of our attendees typed in a question here about asymmetric or wedge mouthpieces, and are those designs that are better for comfort or grip, and what your thoughts on that are?
Is he talking about the wedge
Yeah, the wedge
model? You know, I mean, I've tried those, and for me, I like to feel all of my embouchure, and all of my embouchure meaning everything outside of the rim, you know, and being able to put the embouchure onto the corners of the mouthpieces, the way that the corner of the setting it. I just show it to you, you know, setting it on the mouthpiece. You know, that's where I want my students to engage. Not here, not top to bottom, but side to side, you know, and that frees up the top lip and the bottom lip to get equal amounts of vibration, right? And the wedge design, to me, it frees up the corners, and you feel a great deal of maybe enhanced flexibility. But a line that I always tell people, what feels good to you is negligible to the listener sometimes. You know, beware of something that feels, you know, night and day easier, because sometimes it doesn't sound better. So, I mean, that's my, sorry to jump in there, but that's my own thoughts on, you know, wedge versus an asymmetric mouthpiece. Personally, I want to feel, you know, the sides of my embouchure engage fully onto the rim of the mouthpiece. And for me, I think people, you know, if they don't like a mouthpiece, usually it's like rim design and weight, you know, and the way that it takes air into that instrument, you know, it might just not be a good fit. But yeah, beware of something that feels like instantly you have more flexibility. I think your sound is your business card. You know, I've studied with people that have preached that ad nauseum, and I fully believe it. The older that I get, your sound is your business card. People hear you, and it is you. You know, and they fall in love with it, or they don't. You know, it's like going on a first or second date. You know, are you attracted long term to the person or not? You know, same thing with your sound. So you have to take great care with it.
While we're on the subject of sound, and getting deeper into the mouthpiece. We had a question from an attendee who's asking, how does lengthening the cylindrical depth of the throat of a mouthpiece affect the tone production?
I think it's more to do with the stability than the tone production. If you get that straight piece, and I've had some friends that have shown me mouthpieces that have maybe even 8 millimeters, 9 millimeters of straight space. It does play different, but there's always a trade-off. There's always a trade-off. Talking about instruments for a moment, way back in the 1980s in the Besson factory, they showed me an instrument that had come from Japan, and they said Besson in Japan have designed an instrument that plays perfectly in tune. I was like, very interesting. So I took it to another room and I tested it with a tuning machine, and all the normal sharp notes were fine. And I got to the top and I went back. I said, this is incredible. Give me another 10 minutes. Well, after 10 minutes, my lip was totally shot because it was the most uncomfortable and physically demanding instrument. So they'd fixed a scientific problem, but they'd created a lot of other basic playability. The time was very interesting. And I've tested, people have designed, Stephen doesn't know this, but some designers who've played around with mine to say, look what we've done here. We've got a new cylindrical tube here. And it was interesting. In some parts of the range, it was like, yeah, this really projects better. And then you go low down, you say, I've lost the resonance of the mouthpiece. So there is a trade-off. And what we've tried to do with our designs is to tick as many boxes as possible. 15 boxes, and we've got 13 of them absolutely right. Whereas, another mouthpiece, it could do something extremely well, great tonal stability, but then you find that the flexibility is really hard work. You may find that the low range, as I say, doesn't respond, doesn't open up in the same way. Or you may find that the high range, you can play very loud, but it loses its resonance. And so there's, as with different metals, and I'm sure that's going to come up, there are some great things that a bronze mouthpiece can do, but others you think, my sound's gone here because I'm not playing in this range at this dynamic. So I think it's great that we experiment with those areas of the mouthpiece, almost the unseen areas, and we should continue to do that. And with the technology we have of designing and all this precise measuring of mouthpieces, it's reasonably easy to do. But we're designing a mouthpiece so that tens of thousands of people in the world can put it in and say, I love playing this, rather than it suiting particularly certain people who are looking for certain things. And I think that's where Denis Wick Company's always trod a very sensible middle path to make mouthpieces that people love to play, and Denis said to me, Stephen, I think it was about 3 months ago, that somebody had recently commented to him that he and the company have actually revolutionized the sound of the British brass band. And I think it's very true, because before that, if you look at the Cozy Cup mouthpieces and the Salvation Army mouthpieces of various designs, which, we wouldn't look twice at now, that homogeneity, I can never say that word, of sound throughout the band that we've been able to create is absolutely fantastic. We've really changed the sound of ensembles, and long may it continue. Yeah, I waffled there a bit. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, I think you're quite right. And it goes back to what I was saying about sound concept. He had a very strong concept of what he wanted from the trombone mouthpiece. But also when he was developing the cornet mouthpiece with Tommy Wilson from the Scots Guards, he realised that the old style cornet mouthpieces, which are almost like a kind of French horn mouthpiece, in kind of miniature, created this wonderful, warm, blending sound. And straight away he realised that was the true cornet sound, and that's what you now hear in British brass bands, thanks to those designs. But I think what you said, one very important thing there, which was about the blending of all the different elements of the mouthpieces coming together. And if you just, you can put a cylindrical section in the throat or whatever, but the reason all these mouthpieces work is because everything is harmonious. You know, the cut
Yes.
and the bore and the back bore and the mass and the rim, they all work together to create the sound. And it's very dangerous to change one element of that because it throws all the other things off as well.
Yeah. And that's where the rigorous testing and not finding something that's just a little bit better than what you've got is just like, while we're here, let's, you know, let's improve everything. Let's improve comfort. Let's improve articulation. Let's improve the ability to keep a nice clear sound throughout the higher range, the whole range. And let's have a mouthpiece that doesn't mean that we're pressing on our teeth after an hour and a half, you know. You know, players would always love to find something that means they don't have to practice. But what I believe we've done is to facilitate improvement hand in hand with good practice.
That's well said. That we got some really lovely tuba focused questions from one of our attendees, Brett. But before we move on to that, since sound is, I mean, I agreed from all of us, the key component of you as a musician. If you're going to go out and look for a mouthpiece, what are the one or two parts, you know, maybe that these two parts work together that have the most effect on sound in a mouthpiece, in your opinion? Aaron, since you're my top left-hand corner, why don't we start with you?
You know, for me, a good quality in a mouthpiece is one that takes air easily and where I can feel the resistance of the tuba staying very stable. So the low register or the high register doesn't back up, you know, or come towards me or go away from me with the way that I teach and the way that I play personally. So, you know, that initial, I mean, we can get into like stainless versus brass. I mean, I just feel like brass mouthpieces take more of the, you know, better, and you get more overtones instantly, you know, and it's a different feeling. But like that synopsis that I just brought up, you know, that when you dump air into a tuba, you know, and how that initial reaction of that air and then the response coming back from it, you know, for me, it's such a, you know, telltale sign of the components of that mouthpiece. You know, if I don't want to let all the secrets out of the AT Ultra series, but there is a very distinct element where you come out of the cup into the throat. There's something there that really adds a lot of focus and power that aids the player in not having to work that hard to keep that sound focused and to keep you into the sweet spot of that note, and adds into the stability. Also, you know, I like, you know, we were talking earlier about having a heavy mouthpiece or a light mouthpiece. I think that also has to do with the instrument you're playing on. You know, now I'm playing Yamahas, which are a lot lighter than Mina Westons. Okay, so there were times where I felt like my instrument, based on the Mina Weston that I had some tubas that were heavier than others, and others that were a really lightweight version. My mouthpieces tended to do better with the lighter weighted Mina Weston. Yamaha being lighter, I feel like my mouthpieces are a great fit. One component that you cannot overlook, especially on the tuba, is where, you know, the gap where the receiver and the lead pipe meet, okay, and then where the end of the mouthpiece comes in. There's a gap, there's a space there between where the end of that mouthpiece and the point where the receiver and the lead pipe meet up, and that creates turbulence. Okay, and that creates a sense of resistance, or a sense of letting the resistance away. And having that down precisely, I mean, we fiddled with these numbers, you know, gone off of other people, what they said their numbers were, and came back to, you know, what I thought my numbers were and Warren Deck's numbers were, and I believe we found the perfect fit. And then when I went over and played Yamaha, getting the American shank down, because you've got to be playing the right shank mouthpiece on the tuba, and there are so many players that come and have lessons with me, and you can hear it in their articulation, you can hear it in how they just can't get the buzz to sit low enough, you know, or they're always sitting a little bit higher, and I say, what mouthpiece are you playing? You know, they might be playing you know, a Yamaha tuba, and they're using a Euroshank mouthpiece. Well, for every 1,000th, you know, that you're off, I mean, that's a huge difference in how that instrument responds and how the air stabilizes that instrument. You know, I'll you know, quote Alan Baer, like he says, you know, you can put a tractor tire on a Toyota and still get to where you're going to go, but is that the most efficient tire for that vehicle? Not really, is it? You know, so I mean, these numbers and where, you know, that gap sits, and I check my students because different companies have, you know, it might have just been up to who was sliding the receivers onto that lead pipe that day, fortunately and unfortunately. And, you know, so you can experiment with a little bit of masking tape, painter's masking tape, and add a little bit of width and pull that mouthpiece out a little bit. You can, I've shaved mouthpieces down to get that number just right. But yeah, I mean, the way that a mouthpiece responds, the way that it takes air, the stability, the flex, having that balance between stability and flexibility. And for me, you know, an ideal sound is clear, open, and resonant. And a good mouthpiece gives you, if you think about like an egg and an egg yolk, I want equal amounts of egg yolk being core to my sound, and then the egg white being the overtones. And I'm a firm believer that if you have just the right amount of core and presence to your sound, and you play a high quality instrument, the instrument will take care of those overtones for you, right? And if that mouthpiece is lined up correctly with the instrument, it will do its work, right? It will do the majority of the work, like what Stephen Mead was just saying, playing that instrument in Japan. They had sacrificed other elements of that instrument, and after 10 minutes, you were worn out, you know? You know, so, and always remember, you know, what you might feel is being easier is negligible to the listener. You know, I love doing blind tests. Every week I'm playing something different for my students. You know, hey, what do you hear? You know, while they're getting their instrument out, and you know, getting feedback, and but of course from people that you trust. You know, but you know, the recorder doesn't lie. So.
Yeah, that's a very important point, actually, Aaron, because especially when we were experimenting with the mass of mouthpieces, quite often what feels best doesn't sound best. And you need to be in your hall, and you need to have one of your colleagues at the back of the hall. And that is the difference, you know, you can really hear the difference from back there.
Yeah.
And when you're actually sitting behind the instrument, you don't always appreciate, you know, how much the sound can change.
And no listener wants to hear somebody struggling to produce sound, okay? You know, I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, nobody wants to hear somebody struggling to produce sound. I mean, it just takes away from your ability to make music on a page when you're struggling physically to play something that doesn't fit you. You know, or if you're just playing incorrectly to it, you know, it is not just equipment, but having the right equipment, you know, is a great starting place. So, you know, it's worth the investment, you know, to figure it out. And as we heard earlier, you know, as you get older, as things change, I know I don't have the same air capacity that I had 5 or 10 years ago. I can feel it. You know, I just recovered from COVID, and I feel like I have a little bit less air. You know, I feel fine, but you know, things happen in our life, don't they? You know, and thankfully we can. It's easier to plug something else that's made of high quality into the instrument and to help us do our job. Because at the end of the day, the listener wants to hear beautiful music made very easily.
I mean, Dan, I noticed that you know, over the recent years, there's been a trend to very large mouthpieces. I think for all the low brass, especially, but also in horns.
Yeah, there's been some more bigger mouthpieces around, but I think with the horn, I mean, I was in Paxman's today talking to customers about mouthpieces, and I think it's very important. Probably applies to other instruments as well, but don't get hung up or sort of blinded by the numbers. I think if you know what the numbers mean, then go and look at your numbers and work out what you want. But if you're a player and you don't know what the numbers mean or the effect of changing something on your mouthpiece might be, ask someone who does, and it's easier for them or us to sort of translate that into what it will feel like. Or we'll be able to say, okay, you didn't like that, but here's something else similar you might like. And you know, if I'm looking at a sheet of form, it's, you know, it's 0.02 of a millimeter or something difference. So, you know, but if I told you that, if I said this is 0.02 of a mil smaller, it wouldn't make sense. But if I just say this is slightly different, then it, you know, you can, it's easier to assimilate that with what you might feel or hear. So I think it's very important not to get too deep into numbers unless you know what the numbers actually mean. But certainly that, yeah, it's gradually getting bigger. But I think there are most horn mouthpieces, you know, in terms of in diameter, are still hovering around 17.5 to 18, but everywhere in between in that sort of half a millimeter size.
I think a lot of brass players, when they're testing a mouthpiece, get slightly sucked into the fact that the first note they play on a big mouthpiece sounds like everything they've ever dreamed of. You know, wow, listen, you know, I've never played a better tuning note B flat than that. More, you know, and then they play the octave and they play some pedal tones and they squeak out a top C and say, yeah, this is my sound, you know. And then they often find weeks later that they've just bitten off more they can chew. Their air and the way they play can't sustain a mouthpiece that deep. I'm seeing it all the time. I've been very fortunate to take on lots of private students the last few weeks. And if I've taken 10 students, 8 of them want to talk about how to play high tones. And when I work with them, what mouthpiece do you want? I said, well, you know, that's a really deep mouthpiece. That's the deepest one in the whole range. Yeah, but I really love the sound, you know, and that's always an interesting debate to have with people, that if you want to play 2 hours in a rehearsal and end up on high D with the fortissimo, then maybe you should think, and I think a lot of people play mouthpieces that are too deep. I've seen a trend in the recent years towards slightly smaller mouthpieces, slightly shallower, maybe with a bit more metal, just to give more security. But then is it the sound they want? You know, on euphonium, you know, we all hopefully have a beautiful sound in our head that we emulate from the best players we've heard, and we want to copy that. But not everyone, you know, does that amount of practice or has that, you know, ability. But there is a process of discovery that everybody has with a mouthpiece or a range of mouthpieces that sometimes goes over 20 years, you know. I know.
I think you're right. I mean, I went through that process because for a long time I was working in studios doing film music and stuff like that. So I had a chance to listen back to myself a lot, you know, and I've realized that, you know, it's possible to have a big tuba and a big mouthpiece, and it doesn't record well at all. The sound is actually too big. The sound goes that way rather than that way. And I sort of quickly latched onto the fact that if you use slightly smaller mouthpiece, something which produced a beam and had core and focus, it recorded beautifully. And you have to work much less hard, you know.
And takes a little bit less air too.
Yeah,
sure. And gives you more possibilities in terms of dynamics. I think a really big deep mouthpiece gives you a big sound. It gives you a big sound, but sometimes you need to be much more chameleon-like. So, yeah, I hope those that are listening, we still have a really good number of people. I recognize a lot of low brass people, euphonium players, and I think many of you are already Denis Wick devotees, which is fantastic. But do experiment. I think one of the hardest things in recent years is that we don't have the ability to test mouthpieces like we used to. You know, when I grew up in Bournemouth, Eddie Moore's Music was the shop in Boscombe that I used to gravitate to on a Saturday morning, meet up some buddies, and they had racks, rows and rows of mouthpieces, and you could literally just take one out, play it for 10 minutes. Nowadays, you know, with music stores, with a few exceptions, not stocking big ranges, you're kind of taking advice from people and then taking a punt and buying it online and hoping it's okay, you know. So the whole nature of testing has changed.
Yeah. Well, if you're a horn player, of course, you can go and talk to Dan at Paxman's and try a whole bunch of mouthpieces.
Yeah, I did. I was in there today. I did take a photo of the shelves, but it's not on this computer. I should have put it on. But you know, I think like Steve says, if you can go somewhere where there is a decent range, you know, and you can try, for instance, all of the Denis Wick Paxmans or all of the Stephen Mead Denis Wick Mouthpieces, you can then get a better picture for that range. I think it's important not to take each mouthpiece sort of in the abstract. If you are trying to look at what a range could provide, it's important to, if you're lucky enough to have a shop near you that will do that.
But even, you know,
useful.
a year and a half ago, Dan, you know, I have people call and say, I tested my friend's mouthpiece at band last night and I really like it. I want to get the same one. Well, not only are we not at band, but we're not even meeting our friends, you know, to do this kind of testing. So you know, and so either people take a punt or they just say, I'm just happy with the mouthpiece I've got. But I think once we open up again in 5 or 6 months time and people can test each other's mouthpieces, I think we should do it. You know, that little bottle of disinfectant spray is going to be compulsory for a couple of years yet, I guess. But yes, those days of testing our friends' mouthpieces and hearing a mouthpiece say, do you mind if I try that? It's hard to do over the internet. So
there's, you know, I think as our opportunities for trials have diminished, there are a lot of devotees to mouthpieces in general that you run into at different shops that, you know, I've seen dealers be able to like just narrow down a person's needs into 1 or 2 mouthpieces, and it will be one of those 2 mouthpieces. Like, you know, if you talk to somebody who is in the know for mouthpieces, they can generally narrow what you need down by just listening to what issues you're having, what you want to accomplish, what instrument you're playing on. So, I mean, that's, you know, you can reach out to any of us at Denis Wick. You can download the Denis Wick app and there is loads of information. If you go to your product page and you've never looked at mouthpieces before, just click on the part that says, I've never looked at mouthpieces before. And it'll take you to a series of 4 or 5 articles to get you in the right headspace to even think about looking at mouthpieces and help you narrow down what you want. But you want to shy away from the people who say, buy this, it'll make you play higher, or get this, it'll make you play lower, because 9 times out of 10, you'll be disappointed, in my opinion. But look for an expert, you know, because if you can't go out to the store as much right now more than ever, it's easier to reach out to somebody because everybody is kind of isolated and wants to talk about what they love. So
Facebook groups are very dangerous. It's a minefield because everybody is an expert. Everybody will tell you, you don't get that. It really sucks. Get mine. You know.
Right.
So it almost should be like, you know, red flashing light warnings on all these discussion groups. Sorry, Steve.
Keyboard warriors.
Mary, I was just going to add to what you were saying that you know, in the States, you know, do come and see our booth at Texas Music Educators or Midwest Band Clinics, or and also ITG and the ITF as well. We have representation there. So there is a very good opportunity to try every one of, you know, Stephen's mouthpieces, or every one of the, you know, our horn mouthpieces, or whatever.
I'm going to be at Midwest this year. Fingers crossed, with brass band of Battle Creek. So any American players, we've got a concert.
Well, you still haven't been to Mary's studio, the testing studio in Chicago. I know Misa has, but I don't think you've made it there yet.
No. As soon as I'm able, Mary, let me know. We can when I can travel.
That'll be wonderful.
all those old days where we used to hop around every week. It just seems like such a long time ago now. Well, it is really. But anyway, we just keep praying that we get back to some kind of normality, you know, in the next year. Would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So do we have any more questions? Because there's lots of people here that I'm sure have lots of questions. And if you haven't typed a question yet, go ahead and do it, you know.
Before we run out of time, one of the attendees who sent in questions was asking specifically about tuba, about backboard, how backboard affects playability of a piece. He says, I've generally seen more talk of backboard in relation to trumpet mouthpieces and sometimes trombone mouthpieces, but don't see it talked about as much in the tuba world. And he followed up also later on asking if backboard had any connection to if certain lead pipes might be better for certain types of backboards. But any of our tuba players have anything to say about that?
Aaron, shall I say a few words about that and then hand over to you?
Yeah.
I mean, I think on tuba mouthpiece, yeah, it is very important that it connects properly with the lead pipe. So there's no point in having a mouthpiece with a massive backbore, which goes into a tiny lead pipe. You know, it's obviously got to match up. Um, the other thing is, I find especially the low register, the sound in the low register, the backbore is terribly important. And I can vouch for this. I've told Aaron this before, but we have a kind of, I guess I'd call it an F tuba mouthpiece, or it's more sort of German style mouthpiece than a funnel type mouthpiece. It's more of a bowl shape. But this 2SL, when we were making it, it was actually in the old days before the CNC machines, it was actually done on the automatic lathes. And this 2SL came out really nice. I was really pleased with the sound in the middle and the high, but the sound completely cut out below about low A or low A flat. It just had no resonance at all. So I asked Clive, the Mouthpiece guy, if he could just open up the backbore a little bit more. And yeah, suddenly that was great. You know, we had a really good low G, and I said, well, can we just do it a little bit more? And he was putting the tool farther and farther in to open it up, and suddenly the F sharp was sounding awesome. But it's still the F and the E was not very tight, and so I said, look, can we just put the tool in all the way, just open it all up? And he said, well, this is the last time I'm doing this. This I can't open it anymore. Yeah. So we did that, and suddenly it had a massive low F and a massive low E on it, and that's how we make the 2SL. So it's a sort of slightly unusual mouthpiece in that it's got quite a tight bore, a very bowl-shaped cup, a massive backbore, and it just works really well. And that's what I use on cimbasso especially. And it's for those movie sessions where you've got to play very low on cimbasso, is just awesome. So that's my experience of tuba backboards. Aaron, I mean, we worked very hard at the backboards on your line, didn't we, to make sure everything was in balance.
Yeah, I mean, just moving the numbers slightly changes so much, in a backbore. And, too big, I'll say like on F and E flat tuba, too big of a backbore for a not strong enough of a player can make you feel like it blows really open and even, but to my ears gives like there's a hole in the middle of the sound. Like there's a sense of, a little bit of an airiness there. Not big enough, as you're talking about, even the low register just doesn't open up quite right, and it also has a lot to do with cup volume. How much volume do you have in the cup, that backbore, and then I think even more importantly is the relationship between the backbore and the venturi, how fast that space opens up, or how slowly it opens up, or at what point does it open up, right? I mean, that just has such a huge effect, again, on getting the air into the instrument. I mean, that's the job of the mouthpiece, is to amplify the buzz and to take that column of air that we're feeding the instrument and put it directly into this piece of metal that doesn't have a brain, and of course making sure that our signal is really clear at the lip. But yeah, I mean, too big of a backbore, it can. I've got a 9.53 millimeter backbore on this latest model. I mean, you can see. I mean, it's rather big, but if you were to turn it around, the way that it comes out, it's not so scary. Okay, so up front, it'll really take a massive amount of air. It doesn't suck it out of me, based on how we've done the work in the venturi and how that lines up with the backbore out of there. But and we change just slightly. The cup on the 0 is a little bit different than the 1. The 1 is very funnel shaped. This has more straight walls and then comes down really dramatically into the backbore. So I mean, man, just every component affects the other, and and yeah, I think all of us would say, we're at these trade shows. We don't mind listening to people come up and play. Of course, granted, this might be the first or second time we've heard you play, but I can say, without a doubt, I've seen Stephen Mead and Stephen Wick say, yeah, stick to your fill in the blank mouthpiece. Yeah, you sound better on that, some people are real stubborn like that, but there's always a honeymoon period to any mouthpiece too. I always give a mouthpiece a week or two, and want to find different. Am I in a quintet? Am I in the orchestra? Am I playing solo? Am I playing in my practice room? Am I playing outside? Am I, tons of different elements. But yeah, that's a good question.
It's surprising to me how many students and advanced players that I run into at the trade shows that don't actually know what they want to sound like. They know what they want to accomplish, but they don't know what they want to sound like. So, when they come to me and say, oh, I need to play this, what mouthpiece do you have for that? And my question back to them is, well, what do you want to sound like? It's just kind of this blank stare sometimes. And I think that's an overlooked question. It's one, on the app, that's where we point a lot of our advice to, is just really focusing the player on what is your sound. Like you were saying, Aaron, are you going to play in the quintet? Are you going to play in the orchestra? What's that focus you're going for? Because without knowing that, viscerally knowing that, not just like, oh, I want to sound like Maurice Andre. Doesn't everybody?
Right.
But you have to know it, not just because you picked it out, but because you've listened to it and you've embodied it so much that you can like feel it inside of you. I think until you get to that point, it's really hard to figure out what mouthpiece you want on your own, and especially right now where you are isolated and you have to kind of figure it out with your own ears and your own recording.
Right. It's a good time to do a lot of listening too, folks, while we have the time. If you're not performing with other people, you can listen to a symphony a night or a solo CD a night.
That was the word that was going through my head as you were both talking. The importance of listening, because we only play what's in our head. When I was a kid, I used to have three players that I idolized. I got every recording of them. I put it onto a cassette tape. Anybody remember them? A C120, and I wore the damn thing out over 3 or 4 years. I used to live with these big white headphones, listening to my cassettes, and the sound that I wanted formulated. And through my life, I've been trying to follow that sound and put more of myself into it. But it was an amalgam of beautiful pictures. And because people don't really listen. They'll say, oh, I saw so-and-so on YouTube. What did you like about it? Oh, it was really cool. What about the sound? Yeah. And we don't have those discussions anymore. It's become much more superficial about who's playing really cool, who's good, without the sound discussions. And years ago, when we didn't have YouTube and we didn't have mobile phones or noisy computers, then we just listened. We listened to recordings, on LPs and things like that. And we went to concerts. So I feel that, part of what we do is to say, look, we really think that these are the best mouthpieces that we can make at the moment. But you need a sound concept so that when you're testing, a 3X and a 4XR and a 2U, you can listen to a sound and go, this is what I wanted. I love it when somebody has a real firm idea of sound. Before coloration, before nuance and expression, there has to be a core sound that you would really like to have. And the rest is, your practice, your, expression that you can bring to play. But it all starts with the mouthpiece and then what we have in our head,
Yeah, and I think when you hear a really great player, from one note, who they are.
Yeah. So we were talking about Maurice Murphy earlier on. I say we've just done this Best and Fridays recording, and there's that lovely YouTube Symphony Orchestra recording clip where Maurice is sitting next to Nigel Gom from the LSO, and Maurice says, well, this piece just starts with a simple tune, and he plays it with the most gorgeous sound with beautiful coloration, and every note is clear. And Nigel Gom sitting next to him saying, Maurice, how do you do that? You're famous for it, but how do you do it? And of course, for him, it wasn't a very complex answer. It's just, I just look at the phrasing and then I imagine I'm singing it. Maurice wasn't known for his singing, but he obviously had an amazing singing brain, and every note that comes out, and to be honest, you could have given him any mouthpiece, but, fortunately he found a Denis Wick mouthpiece that enabled him to sound as brilliant and as amazing as he did on that stuff, to when he's playing something, you know, some gentle tune from a symphony, you know. And when you have genius players, they don't really need that kind of equipment. But yeah, so, well, I think we've covered lots of things. There was a question also earlier on, Mary, about different metals, which is something, you know, probably almost a topic for another discussion. But we've, you know, over the years, I've certainly experimented with different metals, and I've always come back to what we have as the best all-round solution. Somebody made me a bronze version of my mouthpiece 2 years ago, and it was interesting, but would I play a concert on it? Hell no, because there were so many things that were different. So, you know, I've heard some players sound pretty good on steel mouthpieces, but when I've tested one, in no way is it anything like the voice that I feel I have with the instrument. So we will test, we'll experiment, and as situations allow, Stephen, I'm sure there may be some innovations coming, but I genuinely believe what we have at the moment is absolutely the best sound. And that's
I mean, like you, I've tried different mouthpieces over the years, and you know, plastic mouthpieces, very light, and you know, very good for people with allergies, and you know, the very heavy stainless steel and bronze mouthpieces, but brass do it for me. And yeah, and Dan, you were saying about, you know, sheet metal horn mouthpieces. I mean, it's a lovely, you know, lovely light mouthpiece, but it's never going to have the carrying power of brass or the feel, is it?
Yeah, I mean, those sheet mouthpieces, I wouldn't really ever use them for anything except a natural horn. I mean, it's not on a modern instrument. It's just doesn't work in the same way. I mean, that's why I suppose, you know, about 100 years ago, people switched to turned solid mouthpieces. You get much more response. I mean, just talking about materials, there was a range of horn mouthpieces that they came out with a side by side, all the same models, but all in different materials. And just from a view as a horn shop, we just didn't sell very many. The cost, it just ends up being too expensive for people to experiment. You know, if you start using steel or bronze or titanium or whatever, you know, if it's too expensive for people to take a chance on, it's just not going to work as well as being, you know, brass is what we're all used to, I suppose, to a certain extent. So that's what our sound, the idea of the sound we hear in our head is so focused around recordings or people we've heard playing live, you know, 99.9% of which are going to be brass mouthpieces. So that is what's going to match our concept, isn't it?
Tastes may change in the future. Who knows? You know,
maybe
we may have robots playing in brass bands who never make mistakes in the future. Be interesting at registration. Yeah.
Mary, how are we doing with questions?
We had a quick call out to our amazing spinners in the factory, and shout out to the mutes that we haven't talked about it all day because we were focusing on mouthpieces. But actually, this discussion of different metals, it really made me think, well, yeah, your sound production area is the mouthpiece, so you probably don't want to adjust that much. But we have this wonderful range of mutes that utilizes different materials that, you know, manipulate the sound that you're originating here in so many wonderful ways. And that's a great other topic to talk about, you know, what materials.
You've done a good job advertising them tonight, Mary.
Good. Well, I think that's it for our time right now. I would love to continue going on for a while longer, but we have another session starting up in just another hour and a half. So
wow.
Gotta log off and get this one finished and log back in to start with the other artists. We're doing a New York hang with our New York musicians. So if you're interested at all in the New York scene, or interested in becoming a part of it, it's a great chance to network and get to know some of those musicians.
So thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone who's turned up and listened all the way through. If you do have any follow-up questions, especially about euphonium or baritone mouthpieces, feel free to send me an email or a Facebook message in the next few days. I'll try and get around to answering them directly.
Yeah, same here with the tuba mouthpiece. If you have any questions, I know that Stephen Wick and myself are always happy to answer and try to help you find what the best fit is for you.
And I think most of us are on the Facebook group page. So that's another great way to reach out. If you're not already on the group, you can just sign up and I'll enter you in. And it's a great place to continue the conversation for this chat also. Yes, thank you again for all the attendance. I feel like I'm forgetting some piece of information to pass along, but if you are on this call, you have a way to contact me as well. We're the North American distributor. So if you have any additional questions or need a way to reach out to any of these artists, you can feel free to contact with me as well. Stay tuned on the Denis Wick app. We have an events page there. So we're going to be doing regular webinars throughout the year. So if you like this live event or have suggestions for others, just stay in contact and we'll get it created. But thank you again and enjoy the rest of your week. Hope you have a safe and healthy finish to this week and forward, and we'll hopefully see you again on another webinar.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
And happy birthday, Dave Thornton. I've just noticed. Yeah.
Happy birthday, Dave.
Thanks all. That was really, really great. Yeah. Really good.
All right. Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Okay. Cheers
All right.
all.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot.
And
Cheers.
thank you to all the
Thank you.
Yes, we'll see you.
panelists. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right. Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Dan.
Bye.